how I wondered, like, travel. Moving on to travel itself, like, I wondered what you think travel is in its essence, and I wondered how far you think you need to get away from home before you've begun to travel.
That's a good question. Well, let me deal with the last part of the question.
Okay.
How far do you need to go? I mean, the biggest traveling I ever did that first changed my whole universe was just going away to college. And so it meant I drove 180 miles to central Pennsylvania and suddenly felt like I was on a different planet.
We just drove past Bucknell on the way here, as a matter of fact.
Right, the other planet. But of course, like I said before, the main travel that I did that really just changed everything for me was going abroad for a whole semester. That started it, and I've just ever since then been kind of addicted to travel and wanted to do it all the time. So to try to say what it is in its essence is really a good question. It's tough though, as all good questions are. I mean, I essentially think it means being around people who are different than you. And so I was in a situation growing up where I could just look at my downstairs neighbor and I was already near somebody really different than me. I grew up in a really diverse place.
That being?
In the New York metro area.
Okay.
And so for me, I think to try to define travel as being around people who are different than you so that you've gone to another place both physically and mentally is clear, but that can happen even when you're right there in your hometown, as long as if you happen to live in a place where people have immigrated and brought values and ideas with them, then you can certainly get an experience of that so that it's like traveling even though you're right there. But that may be a little different for me since I grew up in a pretty diverse place.
Okay. But that brings an answer to so it's not necessarily geographical movement, but movement of the mind.
I think more so. I mean, 'cause also I've seen people who go halfway around the world and say, "Where's the peanut butter?" Like they just want it to be like America.
They do have McDonald's in China and Japan.
Right. And so I think that you can have any of the following three situations, like somebody who travels far physically but then doesn't travel at all mentally, and that kind of ruins the whole experience, just makes it like a tourist trip that you now have some slides to show your friends from.
Right.
Or you could go far away, both logistically and mentally, which is ideal. But I think you can also have those experiences of traveling in the mind, even though you've barely left your own home.
Well, now I know after having had you as a professor that your one of your specialties is ancient philosophy, and Plato. I was lucky enough to take a whole course about Plato with you, and I thank you again for that. But these old philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, who had some of the most profound and important ideas that have ever graced the planet, their ability to travel around physically and geographically was severely limited by the times.
Actually, no. I mean, this is one of the great things about the Greeks. Like, people think, why study the Greeks? What's so important about the Greeks? And perhaps intellectually lazy people think, well, it must have been something in their genes. Like in that film, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where the dad says, there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who are Greek and those who wish they were Greek. Like, some people might be tempted to think there's just something genetically special about the Greeks, but obviously that's not true.
Right.
So one wonders then, well, what the heck was going on in ancient Greece such that the Greeks thought to invent math and astronomy and democracy and philosophy and so on? And in truth, the answer is that because they are a coastal state, so almost all the city-states were very near the water, and Greece was famous for being a big naval power. They were in this really unique situation where if you had a controversial but important idea, you didn't have to risk being exiled from your country or arrested or killed, because you could just like that hop on a boat. If let's say you're Athenian, you could hop on a boat, swim over to Sparta, where the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and now you could seek safe refuge there. Versus if you live in like a totally landlocked country, it's a lot harder for an intellectual to escape persecution. In fact, this is why people found it so surprising that Socrates stayed and let himself be executed. People expected him to flee because that's what people who got in trouble because of being controversial did. And so that's a big part of why the Greeks had this flourishing of ideas, is precisely because they traveled so much. And in fact, Plato traveled a great deal to Sicily and Italy, and that was a big part of how his own ideas got mixed with Pythagorean ideas, which is a big part of Plato's thinking.
Sure.
So they actually did travel a great deal
Okay.
by water.
Well, at the same time, there were you know a lot of different spots in in the world that
Sure.
that they couldn't get around to.
For sure,
You know,
yeah.
so I wonder what do you think if different cultures had been more readily accessible and available to one another, what do you think the world would look like today?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think we're seeing those kinds of tests now that we live in this totally globalized environment where people can both physically travel to see each other and meet each other, but perhaps even more importantly, just traveling, you know, your mind traveling on the internet to meet somebody. So, for example, like this whole situation in Iran right now, the reaction to the election there a couple weeks ago, to be able to see online, on YouTube, on Facebook, whatever, all these images that are banned, that people are risking their lives to get out into the world. I mean, it goes to show how important it is for cultures to know each other and to know what's going on in each other's communities. So I think that if the ancients had had that chance, there's no telling how freaking brilliant it would have been if just getting over to Sparta did these kinds of wonders. So yeah, I mean, I think it's also, for the later Greeks, it was really important to aspire to that, to travel and to think of yourself not as just a citizen of Athens or a citizen of this collection of city-states that we now think of as Greece, but to think of yourself as a citizen of the world. So Diogenes of Sinope was the first, when people asked him where he was from, to say, I'm a citizen of the world, to say that you're not just from wherever you first lived, but that, you know, because you're human and other human beings live all over this planet, that's our fundamental political association, just the world, period. So they got to that thinking slowly but surely, and I can only imagine how robust it would have been if they could have done the things we can do now, hop on a plane, jump on YouTube, etc.
Sounds like something John Lennon would say.
Exactly.
Well, let's take human interaction completely out of the picture, and I wonder what do you think on an individual basis the effect of physical and geographical setting have on somebody's frame of mind, somebody's ideal.
That's a really important issue. I mean, I think that there are some places that you can visit that just change you, and not because of people you met there, but just the physical space. You wouldn't know it by the state of my house today in the midst of the painting, but I'm normally a pretty neat person because my mind feels cluttered if I'm around like too much junk. I can only imagine how you're doing it in that cramped car. But yeah, like
Sarah.
I think that your physical space really does affect your thoughts, and if you're in a serene or inspiring place, it makes you serene and inspires you. So I think the most like earth-shattering place I've ever been, even though on the whole it's not my favorite country or anything, but my best travel experience, perhaps, of a one-moment variety was in Ireland. There are these cliffs on the west coast of Ireland called the Cliffs of Moher that are so enormous that you can look, in every direction to your side and you just see them go on forever. And they're so steep and deep that I can't speak to exactly how sheer the cliffs are, but it has to be a drop-off of 1,000 feet. And it just goes on in every direction that your eye can see. I mean, it's the most sublime place I've just ever been. And so I think if you could be around sites like that, it does change who you are, just to have seen something like that. And a more local example, like I walk down by the river with the dogs all the time because I think being around water just helps make people feel more serene. And whenever I've lived in a landlocked environment, it starts to make me feel a little crazy. So I think, yeah, definitely it's not just about the people, but just the places that you go really do change the thoughts that come to your mind and your mood and that kind of thing.
You're right. Well, we've pretty much got everything we need. But I wondered, just personally, what would you do differently if you were in our position?
Make sure to eat a lot of greens while you're on the road. I know it's tough to eat yummy food or nutritious yummy food. So make sure to eat your greens.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Coleen, so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.